Buy or lease the car. What is the best option for you, not the car dealership? The car industry is expected to grow in the coming years despite the volatile macroeconomic backdrop. The global car sales in 2023 are forecasted to top 69 million, especially in emerging markets.
In today's video, I will talk about buying versus leasing a car and provide you with some bonus tips to think about when getting a car. Let's take for the calculations this Jeep Compass with a purchasing price of $28,400, excluding all the additional costs of sales taxes, for example. Warning.
Technically speaking, there are three options to consider when buying a car. Buying it outright or finance it. In both of these options, you would be still the owner of the car. On the other hand, you could potentially lease the car, but there the leasing company would be the owner of the car. Now, starting off with the example with the brand new Jeep Compass. The purchasing price would be $28,400. Let's assume that you would hold on to that car for approximately 3 years, and the resale value after that would be around $15,000. That's what my short research gave me approximately. Taking that example to make a calculation to buy it outright would look like the following. You would have a total cost of $13,400 if you can resell your Jeep at that price.
But don't forget about the so-called opportunity costs.
Now, what are the so-called opportunity costs? As Google would say, the potential benefits that an individual, an investor or business misses out on when choosing one alternative over another.
Let me explain you that with a simple example.
Now, let's assume that you would invest your money into the S&P 500. The S&P 500 replicates the largest 500 public companies of America. In simpler terms, just imagine a big basket with the biggest 500 companies of America, where you would invest your money into their stocks indirectly through an ETF fund, for example. The annualized return, inflation adjusted, and also including the dividends, would be roughly 7%. That means instead of buying your car for $28,400, you could have invested that money into the S&P 500 through an ETF fund and would get a return on your investment of approximately $6,400. After 3 years, if you would sell your ETF funds, you would have approximately $34,800 in your bank account. That means the opportunity cost would equal your return on investment if you would invest your money into the stock market.
I could take into account other factors in those calculations, but let's keep this video simple and easy to understand.
However, coming back to the total calculations, you can see when adding up these opportunity costs, the cost would be now $19,800. Moving on to the financing calculations. The Jeep website was awesome. I could get all the information needed for financing and leasing on the website itself. After doing some research in the internet, I found the financing interest rates between 6 to 7%, and that's also what I took. The purchasing price is the same at $28,400. There are possibilities to make down payments upfront.
But if you decide to purchase your car through financing, the cost saving is not that big, and remember the opportunity costs I've talked about earlier.
If I would calculate these 3 years, it would leave you with a total cost of $31,350. And hopefully you can resell the car at the price of $15,000, which would leave you with the costs of $16,400 approximately. Now, comparing these two options, you can see with the opportunity costs I've calculated, you end up paying more if you buy the car upfront compared to the financing method.
But there is an issue with that.
First and foremost, the opportunity costs. If the market would experience a decline of 20%, would you still be able to sleep soundly at night? Deciding whether to buy a car involves considering your individual preferences and the opportunity costs. Some people prioritize safety and prefer to keep their money into bank accounts or invest into government bonds. And that's why the opportunity costs of a car purchase can vary from person to person, ranging from 0% to 8%. It's essential to assess your comfort level and financial situation before making a decision. In general, also interest rates and inflation can influence the prices. Another thing are discount factors, which I will not talk about in order to keep the video as simple as possible. Prices and interest rates can vary from country to country. In Switzerland, for example, I know that consumer loans are very expensive, and that's why most people rather just buy their cars up front or have a leasing agreement. Down payments can also influence how much the total cost of the purchase are, especially when it comes to leasing. Now, moving on to the leasing option. I also took these numbers from the Jeep website and pre-calculated it. The leasing rate for that Jeep Compass is roughly 11% currently. Now, you're not only paying the interest costs, but also the depreciation of the car, which can vary massively depending on the car's residual value. Now, you see in these calculations that it would leave you with a total cost of around $19,300. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the residual value of the leasing option. The residual value would be the amount you would have to pay if you wanted to keep the car and buy it after those 36 months. And that's also how the depreciation part of your leasing payments monthly are calculated upon. If you're considering a leasing option, take a closer look at that residual value. Another thing is the down payment you could potentially make at the beginning of the lease start. Those down payments can save you a lot of money when it comes to leasing a car.
For these calculations, we don't take that into consideration and simply calculate with the resale value.
If you compare these three options, you can clearly see if you would finance your car, it would be the cheapest option in this case. But as mentioned earlier, a lot of different factors can leverage the results. One crucial factor is the residual value. That determines the car's estimated worth at the end of the lease. On the other hand, there is the resale value, where you have to ask yourself if you can really sell that car for that price.
So, before going for an option, make sure to carefully check and understand the values and factors to make an informed decision.
Now, I've run through the same calculations with the second-hand car. I mean, that's also what I would recommend you generally speaking. But let's assume a price of $17,000. The car would be 3 years old and you could potentially sell it after 4 years of ownership at a price of $12,000. Now, comparing these results again, you see that with some minor changes, buying outright would be the cheapest option now.
Simply because of the opportunity costs, which I reduced to the interest rate of a US government bond for 5 years. Well, let's summarize your options.
The pros of owning a car outright is the ownership of the car and the peace of mind you would have. You wouldn't have any debt, and it would also be a one-time purchase. Additionally, you don't have to pay any interest rates, and it makes a lot of sense that you would buy it outright if you plan to hold on to the car for longer periods of time. Especially consider buying second-hand cars, which are roughly 3 to 4 years old. The con you have on the other side is the highly depreciating asset, and you need a large saving up front. Additionally, you have the opportunity cost, which can vary from person to person. The pros of financing are the ownership of the car and the possibility to buy a car with other people's money. Generally speaking, you have a higher flexibility there, and if you invest your money wisely, you can potentially make it cheaper than buying it outright.
But most people would simply spend it on consumption.
The con is clearly the high interest rate you would have and the fixed cost you would have through the monthly payments. For the leasing, I see clearly two major advantages there. One thing is the responsibility you don't have regarding the reselling of the car and the possibility to change the car more frequently. Cons are for sure the high interest rates you would have and of course the fixed costs with the monthly payments. Additionally, you can potentially have restrictions when it comes to repairs, for example, which have to be done through provided garages from the leasing company, and also mileage restrictions. Another major factor to look after is of course the residual value.
Now, you're probably asking yourself, what is the best option for you out there? Because these calculations gave you a clear overview, but not what suits best for you. Answer simply these questions.
How long do you plan to keep your car for? How much money do you have currently to buy or lease the car? Where would you put that additional cash if you would finance or lease the car? Is it into your consumption, into the stock market, or simply on your bank account? How do you generally take care of your car? And what payment method do you prefer? Having a fixed cost monthly or paying for something upfront? Bonus tips. We didn't talk about all the additional costs you have with buying or even leasing a car. Generally speaking, the higher the car price, the higher are the insurance and gas costs. Take into consideration the parking costs, not only at home, but also at your workplace. And generally speaking, don't neglect the maintenance cost you would have. I mean, replacing a broken part of an Audi will be much more expensive than a Skoda. Just go with the rule of thumb. If the value of the car you're planning to purchase is high, the higher the maintenance and insurance costs will be, especially for the financing and leasing option. They typically require a higher insurance coverage.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure you watch this video next, where I reveal Warren Buffett's frugal living habits.